So we've talked a little bit about where domain-driven design comes from, the origins of it and the history, but we haven't really established what a domain is. I'm not going to make any assumptions here about, what your background is or what your understanding is. When I first started with domain-driven design, this term domain was kind of foreign to me, or at least it was foreign to me in this context. I didn't really understand what the term meant in the context of software development. So the first thing we need to do is we need to establish the meaning of what a domain is and what we're trying to achieve. So a domain, if you look up the dictionary definition, is going to be a sphere of knowledge. So if you're talking about a domain, you're talking about a specific area of knowledge, basically. Now, in the context of software, that changes a little bit, but not really. At its core, it's still the same basic meaning. And what it means in the context of software is it's referring to a business or idea that we are trying to model. Typically, when we build software, there is some sort of concept or some sort of business that we're trying to model, and that is our domain. Experts in the domain are therefore people who understand that business or that idea, not necessarily the software. So if you're building banking software, for example, then you're going to have, your bankers are going to be domain experts. Your domain, first off, would be banking. You will have your domain experts will be bankers, tellers. Any of the bank managers are potentially domain experts. So these are all people with expertise in the domain, not necessarily the software. In our restaurant example, then it's going to be people like your servers and your restaurant managers, your cooks, your chefs, your dishwashers. All of those people are potential domain experts. So essentially, if you go back to our case study in the exercises, the people listed in the case study are all domain experts. So the goal of domain-driven design then is to build a model that the domain experts can understand. So we're trying to build a model that we can show to these experts who, again, remember, they don't understand the software. We want to be able to take that model, present it to them, and have them understand what we're talking about. This means that we need some sort of way of communicating, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But one thing I want to clarify here, when we're talking about building a model, it's important to understand that the model is not the software. That's a common misunderstanding, is that people will look at the software and say that, well, this is my model. The model is not the software. The model represents our understanding of the domain. So our knowledge and understanding of the domain is the model. The software is an implementation of the model. We can implement that model in other ways. It doesn't have to be in software. If we implement the model, for example, using diagrams, then that would be another implementation. If we provide documentation around the model, that's another implementation of the model. So the model is not the software. The software is an implementation of the model, but the software should be implemented in such a way that it reflects the model. And as a result of that, if we talk about the model, we are talking about the software, if that makes sense. We want those two things to reflect each other in a way that is very closely aligned, so that when we're talking about one, we are talking about the other. They don't differ so much that it creates issues in that communication. So on the topic of communication, in order to do this, we need a language that both the domain experts and the software developers can understand and can communicate with. Now, this language is what we call the ubiquitous language in domain-driven design. It is a common language that enables communication between the domain experts and the developers. Terminology in the ubiquitous language comes from the domain experts. So we go and we talk to the domain experts as developers, and we try to understand the words that they use, and we use those words in our model. In turn, we, of course, become domain experts because we are slowly learning about the actual domain. Now, words originate in the domain and are then used in software. We want to try to avoid going the other direction. We want to try to avoid taking software terms and introducing them into the ubiquitous language and forcing our domain experts to use them. There's exceptions to that. Sometimes that becomes necessary. Maybe there's a particular abstraction that the domain experts don't have a word for, but we need it in the software for some reason. And so we have to introduce that, and then maybe we should talk to the domain experts about it. But that's one key element there, is if we find ourselves in a need to introduce a term that doesn't exist in the domain as far as we know, we should talk to the domain experts about it. And the reason is because they might come back to us and say, oh, actually, we do have a word for that. It's, X, whatever X is. And so it's always very important to keep that communication going, and to do it in such a way that it allows you to maintain a conversation. If we start using highly technical terms like databases and database terms maybe, and event bus and entity and all of these types of things, our domain experts are going to get lost because they don't know what these things are. They know words like order, server, menu, cook, dishes. These are words that somebody who works in a restaurant can understand. They don't know anything about databases. If we start talking to them about databases and table indexes and things like that, we're going way over their head. So we need to make sure that we keep the language in using words that they understand. The idea here is that the domain experts and the software developers should be able to have a conversation about the software without resorting to software terms. And we can achieve that if we stick to the ubiquitous language and if we follow the rules of domain-driven design.